Hunter Biden, son of former US Vice President Joe Biden, made millions of dollars worth of questionable transactions with Chinese nationals connected to the Chinese regime and military, according to a new congressional report. Hunter Biden began developing associations with Chinese nationals beginning in at least 2009, the year he co-founded the US investment and advisory firm Rosemont Seneca Partners. According to the report, these financial connections accelerated while his father was vice president and continued after he left office. Joe Biden was vice president during the Obama administration from 2009 to 2017. He's currently the Democratic Party candidate for the upcoming presidential election in November. The other founders of Rosemont Seneca Partners were Chris Hines, the stepson of former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, and Devon Archer, one of Hunter Biden's business partners. The report, released on September the 23rd, was authored by two Senate committees, Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs and the Department of Finance. In response, Joe Biden's campaign spokesman Andrew Bates said the Senate report was using taxpayers' dollars to launch an attack founded on a long, disproven, hardcore right-wing conspiracy theory. Two Chinese nationals became prominent in Hunter Biden's financial network with China. Disgraced Chinese oil tycoon Ye Jiangming and Asia-based financier Dong Gongwen. According to the report, Dong was Ye's business associate and executed transactions for Ye's companies. The report found that Hunter Biden made millions from his relationship with Ye and received millions from Dong's companies. The Senate report stated, Ye and his associates had robust relationships with China's military units, some of which were involved in matters in direct opposition to US policy in the region. Ye founded CEFC China Energy, an oil conglomerate that made billions of dollars in Russia, Eastern Europe and parts of Africa. In addition to shady business practices, the oil company hired former military cadres and leveraged such connections to advance itself, according to Chinese media exposés. The new Senate report identified a transaction of potential criminal financial activity in August 2017, when CEFC Infrastructure Investment, LLC, a subsidiary of CEFC China Energy, sent a payment of $100,000 to Hunter Biden's Washington-based law firm, OASCO. It is unclear what the money was for. Another incident the Senate identified as potential financial criminal activity took place in September 2017, when Hunter Biden and Dong opened a line of credit at a bank under a business named Hudson West 3 LLC. The credit was made available to Hunter Biden, James Biden, and James Biden's wife, Sarah Biden. James Biden is Joe Biden's brother. The Senate report stated the Bidens subsequently used the credit cards they opened to purchase $101,291.46 worth of extravagant items, including airline tickets and multiple items at Apple Inc., stores, pharmacies, hotels and restaurants. Millions went from CEFC Infrastructure Investment to Hudson West 3 and then to OASCO. On August 8, 2017, CEFC Infrastructure Investment wired $5 million to Hudson West 3's bank account. From August 8, 2017 to September 25, 2018, Hudson West 3 sent more than $4.79 million in the name of counselling fees to OASCO. Hudson West 3 was one of 8 numbered Hudson West business entities, and the Senate report found that Dong was connected to 7 of them. The report didn't elaborate on the connections, and it is unclear whether Hunter Biden is connected to the other Hudson West firms. According to the Senate report, Patrick Ho, a Hong Kong-based businessman who served as Secretary General of a CEFC subsidiary, China Energy Fund Committee, was also Hunter Biden's client at OASCO. Ho is also implicated in CEFC's misdeeds. He was charged by US prosecutors of bribing top officials in Chad and Uganda in exchange for business opportunities for CEFC. On March 22, 2018, Months before Ho was to go on trial, a $1 million payment was sent from Hudson West 3 to Owasco for Ho's legal representation, the Senate report found. According to a Department of Justice press release, Ho was sentenced to 3 years in prison in March 2019 on several charges including money laundering and violating the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act. The Senate committee said the financial ties between Hunter Biden, his family and the Chinese nationals don't just raise conflicts of interest concerns, they raise criminal, financial, counterintelligence and extortion concerns. The Joe Biden campaign didn't immediately return a request for comment on the transactions with Chinese individuals.
After severe flooding in central and southern China ruined rice crops, many farmers have been left struggling. Following heavy rainfall in the past half-month, some rice crops began to sprout, meaning they can no longer be harvested. China's National Meteorological Center warned that more rain is expected in central, southern, and southwestern China for the next couple of days, with some anticipated to be more severe. Chen, a farmer in Poyang County, Shangrao City in eastern China's Jiangxi province, told the Chinese-language Epoch Times in a phone interview, "Sprouted rice cannot be produced into rice grains. I really want to cry, but my tears are all dried up." Chen and his fellow villagers plant rice, cotton, and sesame. He said that their adult children are migrant workers in major cities, but have been unable to earn enough money due to many factories closing during the CCP virus pandemic. Farmers in Jiangxi typically have 2 planting seasons, one before May to harvest in July, and another before August to harvest in October. However, the first season's crops were ruined by flooding. But while farmers planted another round of crops hoping to harvest in September, the second harvest season also has been disrupted. Chen said, "A lot of rice fell into the water. Some rice sprouted. The other crops that still stand in the field are wilted. We can't harvest enough rice." Elsewhere, rice crops in Guizhou province also sprouted before farmers could harvest them, a local netizen posted on Chinese web portal NetEase on September 20th. Chen planted cotton and sesame after the floodwaters receded. However, these crops didn't grow well. He added, "Cotton really needs sunshine. Without sunshine, we can't have a good harvest." He said that the disruptions have caused the price of rice and other staple foods to rise sharply, especially pork. Meanwhile, villagers whose homes were destroyed by the flooding haven't received any assistance from the local government. Chen's friends and relatives living in the city are also having a hard time because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Chen said, "This year is very tough. My friends who operate porcelain businesses are all in bad shape. At least half the stores in Jingdezhen City were closed." For more than 1,000 years, Jingdezhen has been known for producing China's finest ceramics.
The U.S. Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security issued a letter dated September 25 to American companies, asking them to acquire a government export license before they can sell certain technology to the Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corp. (SMIC) and its subsidiaries. It is another U.S. blow to the Chinese Communist Party in the chip sector after cutting off supplies to Huawei. According to documents obtained by Reuters, SMIC's subsidiaries and joint ventures in Shanghai, Beijing, Tianjin, Shenzhen, Ningbo, and even Italy are among those subject to export restrictions. Any supplier affected by the export order will need to apply to the U.S. government for an export license if it wants to continue supplying SMIC. The U.S. believes that exports to SMIC pose an unacceptable risk of being diverted to military end use, but SMIC argued that it has nothing to do with the CCP's military and does not make chips for military users or uses. SMIC is based in Shanghai and has operations in Shanghai, Beijing, Tianjin, Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, the U.S., and Europe, according to its website. By the end of 2019, the company had nearly 16,000 employees. Zhen Haocheng, a current affairs commentator, believes that SMIC is a big player in China's chip industry. It's impossible for SMIC's technology not to be used by the military, and it doesn't have the power to say no to the military. SMIC is working with a large defense conglomerate according to a study published by U.S. defense contractor SOS International. Researchers from a number of universities with military backgrounds followed SMIC's product requirements to design accordingly. One of the military academies was placed on the Commerce Department's export blacklist in 2015 for allegedly designing chips for supercomputers used to simulate nuclear tests.
The current U.S. sanction on the CCP is, in fact, an attack on its dual-use technology, on the CCP's ability to threaten the world. SMIC has a special place in the chip industry as a whole. So far, we know that a few companies like Huawei have chip design capabilities, but in China, only SMIC has high-end chip manufacturing capabilities.
Tin said the U.S. simply can't avoid SMIC selling its products to the military or to companies restricted by the U.S. because it doesn't have enforcement power. Therefore, weakening the SMIC is the only way to decrease its support for the CCP's military or those sanctioned by the U.S. The Wall Street Journal analysis pointed out that once SMIC is included in the trade blacklist, it will not only be a matter of further widening the gap between SMIC and Taiwan's superconductor companies, but also a matter of life and death.
SMIC equipment, software, and even some of its key raw materials actually come from countries led by the U.S. After this import restriction, SMIC capability has been greatly weakened. It will be difficult to develop new and higher manufacturing capabilities for some of these chips in the future.
Tin pointed out that the reduction in chip manufacturing will pull the CCP backward in the whole military field, including missiles, radar, satellites, and so on. The CCP would no longer have the capital to challenge the U.S. and the ability to create threats and unrest in places such as the South China Sea. China's rocket launches have failed 3 times in a row this year, prompting many netizens to speculate that it's caused by the U.S. blocking the chips. Since last year, ASML, a Dutch chipmaker, has failed to win government approval on the proposal to export SMIC's manufacturing equipment. On September 24, the FBI Director Christopher Wray stated at a vaccine hearing that fundamentally, the CCP is trying to gain a leading edge by stealing information from others, rather than through self-innovation. He also pointed out in June that the CCP poses an extremely serious national security threat to the U.S., which has spent huge resources investigating more than 2,000 cases related to the CCP government, and an investigation is initiated every 10 hours on average. He also said earlier that almost all of the 1,000 attempted thefts of intellectual property that the FBI is investigating are related to China.
One of the hallmarks of the CCP's theft of foreign intellectual property is its huge crowd strategy and its ubiquity. Huawei is just one of the big black hands. There are also many middle-sized black hands and countless small black hands. SMIC is one of them as well.
The United States has stepped up its resistance to CCP infiltration and is concerned about the dangers of the CCP's firewall. On September 28th, U.S. Undersecretary of State Keith Krach posted a video on Twitter calling on Xi Jinping to tear down China's Great Firewall. In 1987, President Ronald Reagan, in front of the Brandenburg Gate in West Berlin, called for the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, to tear down the Berlin Wall, which has separated West and East Berlin since 1961.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
More than 30 years later, the Undersecretary of State, Keith Krach, standing next to the statue of President Reagan at the U.S. Embassy in Berlin, said the same thing to the Chinese Communist Party General Secretary Xi Jinping.
The Berlin Wall is gone, but a new digital wall has emerged. The Great Firewall of China. The Great Firewall of China separates the Chinese people from the free world, just as the Berlin Wall separated the German people from each other. Mr. Xi, tear down China's Great Firewall.
Jiang Jian, an observer of China in the United States, said that Krach speaking to Xi Jinping in such a special place delivers an important message.
The U.S. government has clearly separated the CCP from the Chinese people. So how can the Chinese people know the evil nature and brutality of the CCP? Overthrowing the firewall created by the CCP is bound to be one of the urgent tasks for the U.S. government in the future.
Jin Chun, a former engineer at the Huawei Nanjing Research Institute, pointed out that the firewall built by the CCP is far more harmful than the Berlin Wall.
This firewall is the most evil wall. A person gets to know the world through all kinds of means. Because of the existence of this firewall, it could be said that all the ways through which Chinese people understand the world have been distorted by the CCP. Outside this wall is the real world, and inside is the world of lies. This is something that has never happened in human history.
The Chinese Communist Party's firewall has turned China into a local area network, which is not news to the world. However, the CCP virus broke out in Wuhan at the beginning of this year. The Chinese Communist Party covered up the truth of the epidemic by blocking information and suppressing speech, which eventually led to the spread of the CCP virus worldwide. In addition, the CCP is also trying to implement firewall and big data monitoring to other countries in the world. Cratch had previously criticized the firewall for allowing data to flow in but not out, and let propaganda flow out but not let the truth in. Cratch is not the only U.S. official who has proposed to overthrow the CCP's firewall. On June 1st of this year, the Conservative Action Project, a public platform formed by many conservative leaders, published an article co-signed by many political and business celebrities, experts, and activists. The article pointed out China has weaponized its internet into a system of mass surveillance, effectively turning it into a repressive information and mind control system. Breaking through these firewalls will be of critical importance. They called on Secretary of State Pompeo, granted to him by Congress in Section 7050 of the State Department's Appropriations Act, to partner with the private sector to develop technologies and initiatives aimed at cracking China's firewall. At present, some private organizations have developed some successful tools to help people drill holes in the CCP's firewall, such as Siphon and ACI. The GreatFire.org organization launched AppMaker, designed specifically to escape CCP's internet control. In addition, Falun Gong practitioners also developed the FreeGate app and unbounded browsers. VOA reported in August that U.S. government agencies and some other private organizations are stepping up their efforts to develop new internet anti-censorship tools to cross the CCP's firewall, promoting safe and online access and information sharing. Jin Chun said that it is technically feasible to bring down the CCP's firewall.
Of course, it is possible. The U.S. not only masters technologies such as the root server of the internet, but also has the ability to develop various wall-breaking technologies. The United States is also actively developing space-based technologies, such as Starlink, which can physically bypass the CCP's firewall and show the truth to Chinese people.
Jin Chun also pointed out that many Chinese who came overseas and were no longer trapped by the firewall are still ideologically imprisoned. Therefore, they also need to tear down the wall that the CCP has built in their hearts. Cratch's video resonated with many netizens on Twitter, and they left messages saying, "Thank you for speaking out for the Chinese. Act immediately to defeat the CCP."
Chinese diplomats have worked for years behind the scenes to pressure U.S. state and local officials into adopting policies friendly to Beijing. But this issue has only recently gained national attention as the Trump administration raises the alarm on the communist regime's influence activities across the country. In a September 23rd speech at the Wisconsin state capitol, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned that the Chinese Communist Party's covert influence operations targeting state and local politicians have been in full swing for years and increasing in intensity. He cited one example of a California state senator who in 2017 sought to introduce a measure denouncing the CCP's persecution of the spiritual group Falun Gong. The Chinese consulate in San Francisco then initiated a campaign to scuttle the resolution, writing letters of protest to the state legislature. Pompeo said, "Unfortunately, the California State Senate bowed to the CCP pressure campaign and shelved the proposed bill." The then state lawmaker Joel Anderson, who was behind the resolution, said in an interview that such placating was outrageous and deeply disappointing. Anderson left office in 2018 and is currently running for San Diego County Board of Supervisors, a 5-member county legislature. When people saw that one letter and a phone call had such a chilling effect on my colleagues, it begged the question why. Why would they be so tied to the Chinese consulate? Why is it so important for them to not offend and put a blind eye to atrocities? Adherents of Falun Gong have faced brutal persecution in China since 1999. Falun Gong is a traditional meditation practice featuring slow-moving exercises and moral teachings, centered around truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. US-based Falun Dafa Information Center estimates that millions have been detained and hundreds of thousands tortured. disturbing evidence has continued to surface about the regime's state-sanctioned practice of killing adherents and selling their organs for transplant surgery. As a symbolic stance to condemn the uncompromising courage of Falun Gong practitioners and condemn any government-sanctioned persecution against them, the resolution passed unanimously through the state's Judiciary Committee on August 29, 2017, but was blocked just 2 days later after an unsigned letter from the Chinese consulate reached every member of the state Senate. The U.S. House of Representatives, along with multiple state legislatures such as Minnesota, Arizona, Missouri, Illinois, and Colorado, have passed similar resolutions. Framing the bill as anti-China and anti-human, the consulate letter claimed that it may deeply damage the cooperative relations between the state of California and China and seriously hurt the feelings of Chinese people. Anderson called the letter stunning. He said it was very forceful. It told them that people would be held accountable who moved forward with it. According to Anderson, a phone chase ensued, whereby the consulate called up senators to make sure they saw the letter. Days later, the former senator denounced the threats at a rally in front of the Chinese consulate. During the last week of the Senate session, he also made at least 18 attempts to bring the resolution to a floor vote, in the hopes that people would come around to their senses. At one point during a speech on the Senate floor, he called on his colleagues to look around the gallery, which was seated with victims and relatives who fled China due to the persecution, and appealed to them to look in their faces. He said it was a chilling moment. I just thought for people who say they care about stopping atrocities, standing up for innocent lives, for always being for the underdog, I was deeply disappointed. He added, to think that California or any U.S. legislator would be influenced or intimidated by the Chinese government is scary. We should feel confident in our own country to call out atrocities when we see them. He further pointed to the hypocrisy of politicians who were quick to call people out for not being quote-unquote woke on social justice issues, but refrained from speaking up in the face of such atrocities. An email inquiry to Kevin De Leon wasn't immediately returned. De Leon was the then president pro tempore for the California State Senate, and now a Democratic member-elect of the Los Angeles City Council. Anderson, who hadn't had a chance to speak with De Leon about the issue, had learned from several senators new to the legislature at the time that they were acting on orders from leadership to vote against it, he said. He said they felt pressured, they weren't sure what was expected of them, and they weren't confident enough to be their own person. In hindsight, I know that they have regrets. The threat letter is but one facet of the Chinese regime's influence operations over the years. Most recently, a New York City police officer was arrested on suspicion of spying under the directives of Chinese consular officials. And in March, the Chinese consulate in Chicago twice emailed Wisconsin State Senator Roger Roth, asking him to pass a resolution drafted by the consulate to praise Beijing's leadership in containing the CCP virus outbreak. Roth, in response, introduced a resolution laying out point by point how Beijing has been lying to the world and covered up the outbreak. The regime has blacklisted Anderson and called him a terrorist over the letter he drafted to Chinese officials in 2008, urging the release of a San Diego Falun Gong practitioner detained in China. Anderson, however, vowed to continue advocating for China's human rights whenever possible. He said, "This is a tipping point in history. People of good nature have to stand for those being persecuted. Otherwise, this world is going to fail."